everybody is waiting for the same number, $1 million. You figure that is the moment your money finally takes off. It is the wrong number. There is a point where compounding stops crawling and shoots almost straight up. It is real, you can see it coming, and it is nowhere near a million. The strangest part is where it hits. The biggest jump your money ever makes is the last one. That single jump adds more than everything before it combined. Most people quit before they see it because the early years look like nothing is happening. I'm Tom. This channel is about real personal finance, the kind that actually works for normal people, not the kind that gets you to click a thumbnail. No motivational fluff or fantasy returns, we just discuss what the math actually does over time. If that's what you want, hit subscribe. Start with the trap your brain falls into. It is the whole reason this feels so slow. We are wired to think in straight lines. You save a little this year, the same next year, the same the year after. In your head, wealth is a staircase, one even step at a time. But the market does not climb stairs, it multiplies. And multiplying does not build a staircase, it builds a ski jump. It stays low for a long time, then it launches you into the air. Our brains are terrible at feeling that curve. You can picture a staircase in your sleep. You cannot picture a ski jump you have not hit yet. So you judge the whole trip by the flat part you can see. And you walk away before the launch you cannot. You have probably lived the flat years already. The automatic transfer is set. You do the responsible thing every month. A year goes by. You check the balance, and it is small. Another year passes. Still small. You watch friends buy boats and book big trips, and you wonder if you were the fool for waiting. That feeling is not a warning sign. It is the toll you pay at the front of the bridge. Everyone who crossed it paid the same toll. The ones who turned around just paid it for nothing. The engine that does all this runs on doubling. Over the last 100 years, a broad basket of American stocks has returned about 10% a year on average. At that pace, your money doubles about every 7 years. That is not a stock tip. It is what the long history shows, through every crash and boom along the way. You might wonder why the market doubles at all. It is not magic, and it is not luck. When you buy a broad index fund, you own a slice of hundreds of real companies. Those companies sell more over time. They raise prices with inflation. They reinvest their profits and grow. And the index quietly drops the losers and adds the winners for you year after year. So the doubling is not a bet on one hot stock. It is the whole economy slowly getting bigger. Your name is on a piece of it. That is why it has kept working for a century through wars and crashes and everything in between. Now the strange part. Each double is bigger than the one before it in actual dollars. Way bigger. Watch what happens to $80,000. The first double takes it to $160,000, so that jump added $80,000. The next double takes it to $320,000, which added $160,000. The one after takes it to $640,000, adding $320,000. And the last double takes it to about $1.28 million, adding $640,000 in a single step. That last jump added $640,000. The first 3 jumps added $560,000 combined. So the final double all by itself delivered more than the first 3 put together. That is the explosion. It is not a place on a map. It is the shape of the whole trip. There is an old riddle that captures it. A lily pad sits on a pond. Every day it doubles in size. On day 30, it covers the entire pond. So on what day was the pond half covered? Most people guess day 15. The answer is day 29. The pond sat there looking almost empty for weeks. Then on the final day, it went from half to full. The doubling was quiet the whole time, right up until it wasn't. Your money does the exact same thing. For years, it looks like a lily pad on an empty pond. You keep adding, the number creeps up, and it feels like nothing. Then the doubles get big, and the pond fills fast. The flat stretch is not a sign that it is broken. That flat stretch is chapter 1 of every single success story. My friend Margaret is 45. She manages an office outside Columbus, Ohio. She has been saving for about 20 years and she has $80,000 put away. When she told me the number, she said it with a sigh. Her exact words were, "I am 45 and I have 80 grand. I am never going to see $1 million." I get why she feels that way. 20 years of work and the finish line looks a mile off. But Margaret is making the classic mistake. She is staring at the distance to a million when she should be counting doublings. Margaret is not a million away from a million. She is 4 doublings away from more than that. Her 80 becomes 160. That becomes 320, then 640, and 4 steps in, about 1.28 million. The last of those 4 steps, from 640 to 1.28 million, adds $640,000 to her account. That is more than she managed to save in her entire 20 years of working, in one doubling, late in the game, without her adding much at all. Nobody feels this in their gut. The big money is not behind Margaret. It is in front of her. The heavy lifting she already did, all that saving, was the small part. The giant part is still coming. It lands near the end, and it mostly is not even her money. It is the markets. So what does Margaret do now? Nothing fancy. She keeps saving what she was already saving, and she stops checking the balance like it is a scoreboard. Because she's still adding money on top, her doublings come a little faster than the market alone would deliver. Her job is not to force the explosion. Her job is to still be holding when it arrives. The 80,000 she thought was a disappointment is the lily pad, already on the water. So why does it feel like nothing for years, then take off? What flips the switch? Early on, you are the engine. Your paycheck does all the work, the market barely helps. But at some point, the balance gets big enough that the market's yearly push starts to matter more than yours. You can see the exact moment it happens because the market starts handing you real money every year. Watch the market's yearly paycheck to you as the balance grows. At $20,000, a 10% year hands you about $2,000. That is a nice dinner out, nothing more. At $100,000, that same 10% hands you about $10,000 a year. That is a raise you never had to ask for. Push the balance to $300,000. Now the market pays you around $30,000 a year. That is more like a second earner in the house. Get to $700,000. Now it throws off about $70,000 a year. That is a full salary, showing up while you sleep. Reach $1 million and it hands you $100,000 a year for doing nothing but staying put. Somewhere around the first $100,000, the market stops being a little helper and becomes a second earner. Below that line, you are pushing the car. Above it, the engine catches and the car starts pulling you. That is the number. Not $1 million, $100,000. The first $100,000 is where compounding wakes up. Maybe $100,000 still sounds like a mountain from where you sit. Fair enough, but look at how ordinary the path really is. Say you put away $500 a month, and your employer matches part of it. Now you are investing more like $800 a month without feeling all of it leave. At the market's long-run pace, that clears $100,000 in about 8 years. That is 1 work decade. There is no lottery ticket here. No windfall. Just a steady transfer you set up once and then forget. The first $100,000 is not about being rich or lucky. It is about being boring for about a decade while the engine warms up. And once you finish that first climb, it starts carrying you. Leave $100,000 alone at the market's pace, adding nothing. In about 7 years, it is $200,000. 7 more and $400,000. Give it 30 years untouched, and that single $100,000 grows to roughly $1.7 million. You did the hard part in the first decade. The market does the rest. The first $100,000 is also the hardest thing you will do in all of investing. Charlie Munger, the late business partner of Warren Buffett, said it plainly for decades. He said, the first $100,000 is a brutal grind and you just have to push through it. He was right, and the math shows why. Say you save $10,000 a year and it grows at that historical 10%. Getting to your first $100,000 takes about 8 years. 8 long years of feeling like nothing is happening. Then it changes. Getting to $200,000 takes only 4 more years. From there to $300,000 is about 3. The next 100, about 2. 8 years for the first 100 grand, 2 years for a later one. It is the same person and the same paycheck. The only thing that changed is that the market finally started helping carry the load. Each 100,000 arrives faster than the last because you are no longer lifting it alone. The hill is steepest at the very start, when you have the least to show for it. That is exactly when most people quit. They save for 6 or 7 years. They look at a balance that still is not 6 figures. Then they decide investing does not really work for regular people. That is 1 or 2 years before the market was about to start pulling its own weight. They quit on the pond the week before it fills, and the dollars you invest during those flat years are the most powerful dollars you will ever put in. A dollar you invest today has its whole life ahead of it. It can double 4 or 5 times before you retire. A dollar you invest 20 years from now only gets 1 or 2 doublings. Picture two savers. Anna invests $5,000 a year from age 25 to 35, then never adds another dollar. Ben starts at 35 and invests $5,000 a year for 30 straight years until 65. Ben puts in $150,000. Anna puts in $150,000. But at 65, Anna has more because her early dollars had more time to double. The one who started earlier won, while adding a third of the money. The lesson is blunt. Time beats timing, and it beats size. So the money you add early is your most valuable money, even in the years that feel like nothing is happening. The flat years feel weak. They are actually the strongest years you have. The season that feels most pointless is the season doing the most work. So add as much as you can, as early as you can, and then leave it alone. Here is the reframe that changes how the next 10 years feel. Stop staring at the balance. That number will always feel too small during the flat years. They are built to feel that way. Instead, count your doublings. Figure out how many doubles stand between you and your goal. At 500,000, you are one doubling from a million. One. The single biggest step of your life, and it is the only one left. At 250,000, you are 2 doublings out. At 125,000, you are 3. A number that sounds tiny, 3, covers a distance that sounds enormous. That gap between how it sounds and how it feels is exactly where people give up. When you count doublings instead of dollars, the finish line jumps toward you. A million feels impossibly far. 3 doublings feels like something a patient person can obviously do. It is the same journey. You are just finally looking at the part of it that is true. Zoom out to a whole working life. At the market's historical pace, 35 years holds about 5 doublings. 5. A pot that doubles 5 times multiplies by 32. So 50,000 turns into 1.6 million across those 5 steps. Most people never picture it as 5 steps, so a million feels like a fantasy. It is not a fantasy. It is 5 doublings and the patience to sit through them. Picture Margaret's 2 possible futures. In one, she believes the sigh. She decides 80,000 at 45 means she missed her shot and she stops trying. That version of Margaret freezes her money right before the doublings get big. In the other, she keeps going. She lets those 4 doublings run, and somewhere in her 60s, the account crosses a million and keeps climbing. Same woman, same 80,000 today. The only difference is whether she quit during the flat part. That is almost always the only difference between the people who make it and the people who do not. Now the honest part, that 10% is a long-run average, not a promise. Some stretches are ugly. A broad market fund actually lost money over the decade from 2000 to 2009. Doubling every 7 years is the view from far away. Up close, no single year feels anything like that. And after you account for inflation, the honest doubling time is closer to every 10 years than every 7. The dollars themselves lose a little buying power each year. The number on your screen grows at the fast pace. What it can actually buy grows at the slower one. Both of those are true at once. The doublings also do not arrive on a neat schedule. You might reach your biggest doubling right as a rough decade begins and watch it stall for years. That is not the strategy failing you. That is just the lumpy way that averages get paid out in real life. The people who win are the ones who expected the lumps and stayed put through them. So far, every crash in American market history has eventually been erased by the doublings that came after. Every single one. That is not a promise about the future. It is just the pattern the long record shows, but the shape never changes. Slow for years, then fast. The last double is still the giant. The explosion is still parked in your future, not your past. As long as you do one thing, you cannot interrupt it. Pull the money out during the flat years and you reset the clock. Panic and sell in a crash, same thing. The pond drains and you start the weeks of looking empty all over again. Your whole job is to sit through the boring part, so you are still holding when the pond fills. The $1,000,000 you have been chasing was never the number that mattered. The number that matters is 100,000 because that is where the market clocks in and starts working beside you. And the milestone after that is not a dollar figure at all. It is your next double because your next double is always the biggest one you have ever had. You are probably closer than you feel. If you have been at this a while, the slow part may be almost behind you. The lily pad is already out on the water doing its quiet doubling, whether you feel it today or not. So do not measure your progress by how far you sit from a million. Measure it by how few doublings are left. Then protect those doublings. You do not have to be smart for this. You have to be patient. The market rewards the seated, not the clever. The whole thing comes down to staying in your seat. Drop your current balance in the comments, round it however you like. I will tell you roughly how many doublings you are from a million. I read every comment, and I reply to as many as I can. A lot of you are going to be surprised how few doublings are left. And if you want the next video, hit subscribe. In it, I break down exactly how to get through that brutal first 100,000 as fast as possible. That is the hardest and most important stretch, and there are a few specific moves that shrink it. I'll see you in the next one.